Okay, very good. So hi, my name is Mark Borthwick. I'm an Open Oxford Cambridge PhD fellow, and I'm working with World Animal Protection to think about a just transition for animals, for farmers, and for the planet. And I was told you're particularly interested in nationally determined contributions, so I'm using them as a lens to talk about how we can change things through agriculture. And like I said, I was originally part of an agriculture panel, so if this comes out of left field, hopefully you'll leave here feeling a bit more excited and energized about the potential for agriculture to make change. Ooh. Yes, very good. So, NDCs, or nationally determined contributions, are our commitments under the Paris Agreement to reduce our carbon output as a country. We're committed to a 68% economy-wide reduction in greenhouse gas reduction by 2030. We're not on track to meet that goal. Only a third of the emissions reductions needed to meet our target to 2030 are covered by credible plans, and food is not covered by a credible plan. Crazily, agriculture, which hasn't seen a carbon reduction since 2008, is also not covered by a plan, despite being one of the largest producers of carbon. So I'm hoping to convince you that committing to include food systems in our NDCs presents a great opportunity for a just transition. Maybe you know about where farm methane comes from, or maybe you don't. We talk all about cow burps, but these are only the top of the iceberg in terms of carbon from farms. Around 8.5% of global greenhouse gases come from animal agriculture, about half of that is the methane I just talked about. But more stems from agricultural land use change to make the food that we then feed those animals. This includes, as our colleague talked about, deforestation overseas to produce food, mostly soy, often in the Amazon or other forested areas, to feed to these animals. The UK imports around 3 billion pounds of animal feed per year. It's a major contributor to deforestation overseas in the Cerrado, the Amazon, and other biodiversity-rich regions. It produces about twice as much carbon as food that we eat. And if we were to just eat that food instead of giving it to animals, we could feed billions of people with that food because it is reduced down. This graph's quite complicated, but in a nutshell, I'm trying to show you that 77% of the world's farmland is used to produce meat and dairy, even though that only produces around 1/5 of our calories. In the UK, that's more. 85% of our farmland produces meat and dairy, even though we tend not to eat that food, we export, we import other food, and so on and so on. About 60% of our food is imported, which puts us in a situation of national precarity. We're very susceptible to things like the prices changing of inputs. As a response to this, the government commissioned the National Food Strategy by Mr. Dimbleby, who has looked at how the farm system could change. When surveyed, this report found most people are committed to continue to eat meat. And so he suggests that we should reduce overall meat consumption while changing the way in which they're farmed to have a significant impact on overall emissions. In a nutshell, we can have it all. We can continue to eat meat, and we don't have to have this radical change in consumer and citizen purchasing habits. But we have to change how it's produced and how much we eat. Dimbleby suggests that by supporting farmers to increase productivity of the land by 30% and cutting meat and dairy consumption by 30%, we will be able to free up 40% of this land to sequester carbon. And I took these slides out because they're too graphy. But the major carbon cost in the land that we're putting animals on is the opportunity cost for failing to sequester carbon on that land. If you look at this is a land map with carbon sequestration potential. Maybe notice that there's these red areas. They map on quite closely to national parks. They tend to be upland grazing. And this is also, the green spaces are the areas which are the least productive in terms of food. Some obvious inclusions there. London's not very productive in terms of food, we knew that. But if I flip back and forth, trying to get travel sick, there's quite an overlap between the land that is the least productive and the land with the largest carbon sequestration potential. And this tends to be where we're grazing our upland animals. So there is a potential here to change this in a way that is beneficial for food production while also being beneficial for carbon sequestration. I'm interested in finding win-win-win solutions. I'm sure you all know that the average farmer in this country is not making very much money. In fact, the majority of them are dependent on government payouts to keep functioning. They are not doing the best for their local environment. They're also not doing the best for the global environment in terms of emissions. And they are not necessarily providing a life worth living for animals. And World Animal Protection's interest in all this is to think about how they can find solutions that are wins for everybody, that are providing better lives for animals in higher welfare conditions, while also helping us meet our climate targets and providing a sustainable business development pathway for farmers. So I've been traveling around the country looking at solutions and coming up with a series of case studies, and I'll show you some highlights. There are solutions to be found with cattle, and I was going to defer to the authority of my colleague, who is the head of the Native Friendly Farmer Network, but he's not here. So I'll just explain to you what he would have explained. This here is an electric fence, and these cows are being mob grazed. So instead of being allowed to range over the hill is split up into little strips with the fencing and then moved from strip to strip. So this tall grass is tomorrow's feed, and this stubble grass is today's feed. And tomorrow they'll be moved onto that field, onto that strip of the grass, and on and on and on. This means that instead of all the grass being continually grazed and being only this high, having tiny root systems, the grass is allowed to grow up, the roots are allowed to push down, and this sequesters carbon into the soil. Which can be extremely effective depending on how depleted the farmland is. On the right here we see little calves, cute little beef calves, Herefords. And I brought you this photo to show there's this tree here. And this tree has been deprived of leaves on its lower branches because the cattle eat the leaves. And when allowed to freely graze, cattle eat about 1/5 woody material as well as the grass. And we've talked about cow burps today, which are a byproduct of sugary enteric fermentation in the gut when you plant like one very effective sugary lay of grass. But if you allow the cows to eat a diversity of grass, including woody material, the amount of methane that they produce drops significantly because it's not a real product, it's a byproduct of the process. This could be done on existing farmland. All you need is to buy some electric fencing, or you see these cows have collars on, they make noises and provide a little electric shock when you move outside of a GPS zone, and cows are quite smart, so they learn that pretty quickly. So this is a management solution that doesn't necessarily require a large amount of capital input, but it's good for the cows, good for the planet, and good for the farmers because they require feeding less soy because they're eating better and tend to be healthier. Another solution is around pigs. So these are Mangalitsa pigs. I provided this very handsome model there to show you that they're smaller than regular pigs and they're woolly. Now, this thick wool means they don't get tick-borne diseases and they can live outside, and they are living outside in the woods. In the 4 years that this farm, Broadacley Woodland Farm, has been operating, they claim they've never had a vet visit and they've never had a sick pig. And because they sell direct to consumers, the pigs that go to market, they aren't subject or exposed to most of the prevalent pig diseases. They also provide a really viable woodland ecosystem service. So this is in a wood where people pay the wood to sequester carbon. So you buy your carbon credits or whatever you want from this woodland. Problem is that when left to its own devices, without the keystone species that our native woodlands evolve with, they get riddled with bracken. And this bracken here can easily be taller than you. I'm 6'3", and I was amongst bracken that was taller than me when I was visiting this farm. But this bit of land right here is the same as that bit of land right there. This is 1 year later. So the pigs furrow around, they eat the rhizome roots of the bracken, and they clear out the understory so the trees can grow. And the difference between areas of woodland where the pigs have been allowed to go, perform the ecosystem services, and the areas in which they're not, where the trees are just completely swamped by bracken and unable to grow, is profound. So this guy puts his pigs in this forest, sells the pork, and has a thriving business. And the crazy thing is, the price delta between his meat and factory farmed meat is actually very small. And if he was selling the ecosystem service to the consumers of the carbon credit and saying, look what our pigs are doing, this woodland is so much more carbon rich than it would otherwise have been, you should be paying us a premium to have our pigs here. He could be producing this meat for a comparable price, in fact the same price quite easily, as factory farmed meat. I'll say that again. This system can produce high welfare meat, carbon sequestration, and it won't cost the consumer any more than factory farm meat, which tortures animals and is creating a full, easy quarter of all of our carbon if you include the feed that they're feeding the animals. Another solution is chickens. So these are from Plantain Farms, which is down this way. These chickens are, again, being put in the woods. So they're pecking around looking for bugs and seeds and wood stuff. So they don't need feeding in the same way as chickens kept inside. They are kept in sheds like this or like tin caravans. Chickens are handy because they only poop at night. I'm sure you knew that. So you can go in and take out the bedding from underneath the chickens, and that's free fertilizer for your farm business. So if you are a farm that could use some fertilizer, you could put these chickens in a spare bit of woodland. You could get new revenue streams in terms of eggs and the meat, and planting or experimenting with breeds that will both lay good, survive well in the woods, and be able to be sold for meat at the end of their laying life. So that's 2 new income streams and an ecosystem service, all for making your bit of wood work a little bit harder and buying some fences and building a shed. Now, maybe you've noticed all these have something in common. They all involve animals in trees. Well, all these animals evolved in trees, and animals would have historically lived in trees in this island, so they're quite well suited to it. The UK has lots of single-use forest, which animals can be developed into as an additional revenue stream. Additionally, some land could be rewilded, like soft rewilded, where trees could be planted with animals underneath, and like we saw with the pigs, rapid regeneration happens when you have that intact ecosystem rather than only trees. There are some policy opportunities here that maybe we can talk about in questions and answers around the way in which we sustain woodland planting, because at the minute it is designed to encourage abandonment with all the payments at the beginning and then very, very little payments to continue to operationalize the woodland. But my point is, with the right thinking, some right leadership from you guys, Lib Dems please, raising animals outside where they belong, hand in glove with nature, can be much cheaper than raising them indoors. And if we stop externalizing the carbon costs of factory farming and start paying regenerative farmers for the public good of ecosystem services, raising animals inside could be, in a very short time frame, more profitable than raising them inside. So I'm come back to this graph to think about what is in the middle. What is this golden yolk in the middle of the egg here? Some effective policy, some flexible funding, evidence-based legislation that is leading and driving us in the right direction. That's good for the planet, good for the animals, and good for farmers. Dimbleby said we can have it all. And by looking around in the country, we already have a lot of the solutions that are ready to go, that are well evidenced, that have been happening here or overseas for decades already. And all they need is the right policy imagination. Just like how our pig man can't tap into existing schemes to get carbon credits, there's no basic payments for pigs. The agroforestry schemes won't let you cover woodland that's not for cows in terms of the density. We wouldn't have to spend more, we just have to be thinking about all of this a little more smartly, I'd say. So to summarize, why should we be including food systems in our schemes, including the NDCs? First, it's a highly carbonized sector. It could be like pushing on an open door, because even though the food system has decarbonized, agriculture has not decarbonized since 2008. Our colleague earlier talked about lithium, and it's possible we can imagine a future where nothing changes in terms of lithium. It's impossible as well that we could imagine a future where we heavily invest in greening lithium overseas, and then a new tech makes all that effort greening it completely useless very quickly. But we can't imagine a future without food. It's something that we're wedded to in the most serious and committed way. And I don't think that we can imagine any future in which some technology replaces food. Number 2, in terms of a good food future, if we farm the right way and support the right kind of farming, we can improve public health and increase the resilience of our food economy. Number 3, solutions exist and they're quite well evidenced, and you can go and see them if you want to. And if you'd like to, you can send me an email. This is me. If you're interested in the slides and the references and where all the graphs came from and the data behind that, you can scan this code. So I'd encourage you, if you're curious, just to take a photo of this slide. You can get in contact with me and you can look at the materials. These slides are all available, my notes are all available. And if you're interested in any of this,
you guys are just going to get that, aren't you?
Very good. I'd love to have a conversation with you over lunch or later in the day or at a later date.
That's all right, I've got a better idea than that. I think what we should do is we should get you to the chap who's doing carbon and one other presenter together very rapidly.
Okay.
Okay, keep going, yeah.
That's the end.
So thank you very much indeed. That's spot on 14 minutes, so well done, yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
So I'm sure we're going to have questions for all of you. We've got probably about 15 minutes according to the timetable I've got.
Sure.
So I'm a vegetarian, but I do know, having been in that field for like 30 or 40 years, that 40 years actually, I've been a vegetarian, that not everyone's going to stop eating meat. So I think what I'm interested in is the solutions you've come up with that mean the meat that is produced sustainably and with biodiversity and climate benefits. And you said there wasn't very much difference in the cost, but where's this is lobbying government to make that happen. How much lobby is there from people? Because the other speakers have talked about like justice and inequalities in food banks and all of that. In terms of making this accessible to all people, I can imagine there's a small group of people who'd be lobbying for the organic meats and the animals reared in a different way. How do you make that sort of global for everybody as opposed to just quite a sort of niche thing is my question.
Sure, so the question is about scalability and price of higher welfare products. So it's obviously complicated. An interesting thing about organic production is that it can be cheaper to produce organic food, and that would seem very strange to anybody's ever been into a British supermarket. But British supermarkets who sell the vast majority of organic products, I think the largest organic seller in the country is Tesco, they know that consumers will pay more for organic food, but they don't pass on that to farmers. So we have an organic premium, but we don't pay an organic dividend. And if you think about, a farmer who's thinking about going organic, and when I worked at the Soil Association, we would shepherd people through a process that took 7 to 10 years. We have to disrupt an ongoing biological process that depends on chemicals, antibiotics, and whatever else. Weather the storm as the things that we've been externalizing for years caught up with us, and then we'd only start to see the new stable equilibrium after a couple of years once the system was embedded. So it is possible to make these things cheaper, and it's possible to make more money by reducing your inputs, even if you reduce your outputs, because you're less precarious in terms of the cost of those inputs. And you're absolutely right that we have to be thinking hard about how to make sure that this is not gate-kept by other institutions and are only available to certain types of people.
Thank you very much. So can we get all the panelists to come to the front?
Spotlight now. Come on.
What would you like to know?
You like it, he's from Oxford.
Necessarily.
Come and stand between us and you'll be on camera.
Oh. There you are.
Look at me now, Mom.
There you are. On Zoom, people can now see you, Mom.
Sure, so I'll just say in a nutshell what we were talking about in the other room. There are some solutions in the UK that can produce animal products at a rate and at a price that is comparable to factory farming. Part of the problem is that we externalize the carbon costs of factory farms and we force farmers to shoulder the costs of being innovative. And the farmers who are innovative are doing so at their own risk, out of their own pockets, and there aren't necessarily the routes that they require to get funding that we would give to other practices that are sequestering carbon and doing ecosystem services. Or there's just not the skills and experience required to market what they're doing to the places that they're trying to market it to. So one example we looked at upstairs was Brotherley Woodland Farm. This puts pigs in woodland, and the pigs provide great ecosystem services to suppress the bracken, allow the wood to regenerate much faster, and therefore sequester a lot more carbon as it goes. And the price delta between the pork they're producing and supermarket pork is small enough that if they were charging the buyers of these carbon credits for the pork, that they could be the same price as factory farm meat. So there are challenges, and ask any organic farmer or any organic charity, being in transition as a farmer is a very perilous position. But I think that if you look the information around how to support that transition and policy ideas from farmers about how to complicate and imagine their business more complexly, the literature and the academic consensus is a lot further on than we might think.
That was really important.
Thank you very much.